Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to Unsafe Space, our daily Covfefe, I guess we're calling it so far. I'm Carter Laren, and I'm joined, as always, by the bad mama jamma, Carrie Smith.
Hello, guys. Good morning. Good
Ah,
Monday.
so Carrie, weekend news. You said there was sad weekend news. Should we start with something sad?
Well, I mean, just the tragedy in Sri Lanka, the terrorist
Yeah.
bombings that killed. I don't know what the number is now. I didn't see this until
I
later
don't know.
yesterday, but I think it's over 200 people
Is it that many?
killed. Yeah, I mean, it's huge, and it's it, there's something disturbing about it aside from just the fact that it's happened to me, which is that somebody pointed this out last night online, and I kind of blew me away. Just the different way that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama talk about this compared to how they talked about like, the New Zealand terrorist attack on the mosque. They won't use the word Christian. They both use the word Easter worshippers, and they
Yeah.
don't use the word Muslim, and they don't use the word terrorist. It's really just a very different thing. I don't know if you saw that. And I think that's like purposeful. If you do a search on Hillary Clinton's Twitter feed for the word Christian, it comes up with zero responses. But if you do a search for Muslim, there's just this never ending scroll, which kind of woke me up to the fact, looking through the whole scroll of every time she's used that word or the word Islam or whatever. It's like, I didn't realize back during the election how often how she was pretty much running part of her a big part of her campaign was running on trying to paint Donald Trump as an Islamophobe
Yeah.
because you can see during and since the election just tons of tweets from her about how Muslims are being discriminated against, but she's never tweeted a word about Christians. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. So by the way, what I'm seeing, it's close to 300 now. But
300 people, yeah.
yeah.
Here's what she said. On this holy weekend for many faiths, we must stand united against hatred and violence. I'm praying for everyone affected by today's horrific attacks on Easter worshippers and travelers in Sri Lanka. Now compare that to what she wrote last month. My heart breaks for New Zealand and the global Muslim community. We must continue to fight the perpetuation and normalization of Islamophobia and racism in all its forms. White supremacist terrorists must be condemned by leaders everywhere. Their murderous hatred must be stopped.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if she said, my heart breaks for the global Christian community? We must continue to fight the perpetuation and normalization of Christian hatred in all its forms. You know, radical Islamic terrorists must be condemned by leaders everywhere. Their murderous hatred must be stopped. She would get you the outrage if she were to say that. And Barack Obama said the same thing. The attacks on tourists and Easter worshippers in Sri Lanka are an attack on humanity. On a day devoted to love, redemption, and renewal, we pray for the victims and stand with the people of Sri Lanka. Not that there's nothing wrong specifically with those two well wishes. I think they're great. It's just when you look in contrast to what they say, why don't they use the words? Why do they specifically avoid words? And I guess I'm reading it in the context of I had just read this SJW professor Dorothy Kim. She is professor of medieval studies, and she wrote this huge. She's one of the loudest, most SJW academics right now, I believe. At least the ones I've read. She wrote this whole lecture, SJW lecture, on telling other medievalists how they should talk about what happened at Notre Dame. And the whole thing, Carter, you should read it. It's like, don't use the word Christian, don't use the word Western civilization, don't use. She had this whole list of words telling them they could not use because it plays right into the hands of the alt-right. And like telling other medievalists like not what they can and cannot say, it kind of that's on my mind too. So this woman saying you can't say Christian,
Yeah.
and then to see this and they're not saying it, it's very, I don't know. I think it's disturbing.
Yeah. I think what you're seeing from uh, you, this SJW professor, but also Clinton and Obama, um, I think it's just revealing the truth about where their philosophy lies and what their intent is. You know, we talk about the culture war all the time. Um, I think to a lot of people, um, the Western civilization, a lot of people, I have my own arguments about Christianity being the foundation or not of Western civilization, and I make arguments that it's not actually the foundation of Western civilization, but it is conflated with Western civilization, and certainly I would agree there's influence and value there as part of Western civilization and why Western civilization grew. So they're a package deal together. People think of Christianity and Western civilization as going together,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you know. It sounds hyperbolic to say, but the philosophy behind Hillary and Barack Obama is the destruction of Western civilization. They're on the other side of the culture war. So you can't say anything that indicates you might have sympathy for any part of Western culture. Sorry, there's turkeys outside of my window.
Oh, you
just a weird
wild turkeys?
Yeah, walking around. Anyway, yes, Western. I think they can't be seen as saying anything that would be sympathetic towards Western culture. So when there's an attack like Sri Lanka, if they use words like Christianity, that would seem as sympathetic towards Western culture. If on the Notre Dame attack, accident, the fire, if the SJW professor or if other professors use words like Western civilization, well, it's sympathetic towards Western civilization. They don't like the term Western civilization. They like to say that they think the term is bigoted because their argument is that Western civilization is an inherently bigoted term because we're all equal, and how could you possibly say that Western civilization is somehow better than other civilizations? And that's only
But you
because,
can't even use the phrase. Like
right?
even they're inferring superiority just by saying Western civilization.
Well, I think only people who want to defend it use it,
Oh,
right?
okay. Yeah,
So
okay.
so it's not a dog whistle to the alt right, but it is a signal to people fighting the culture war that you recognize there is such a thing as Western civilization and that it's distinct from other civilizations. But they don't want to recognize. I don't. It's not that they don't want to recognize it; they want to destroy it. And if you start recognizing that there's a distinction between Western civilization and other civilizations or other cultures, I think you start seeing that it's superior. Like as soon as the only way to destroy it is to not talk about it
Yeah.
correctly, right? Because if I start saying, if I use the word Western civilization, your mind is going to be like, well, how is that different from other civilizations? And then you start to think of things like, oh, freedom of speech and limited government, like, oh, those are good things of Western. And then it starts to get elevated. So you have to like not talk about it. So and for some reason they also have this. I think they have a fetish for Islam, and I'm not exactly sure why, but I think partly because it's an existential threat to Western civilization, in which maybe I'm not allowed to use those words because they could be construed as being
Yes.
weird white nationalists. But I'm not talking about race or nationalism. I'm just saying, like philosophically, Islam is a conglomeration of a religion and a political ideology that is expressed with an express intent to uh, spread itself and control the globe,
Yeah.
right? So obviously not Muslims, but the ideology kind of fundamentally. And so um, I think that's why. I think that's why they avoid it. She needs to show who her allies are.
That's so sick though. I never noticed that before. I remember back when during the campaign, the 2016 campaign, when Trump would say stuff about how Clinton or Obama, could not say the words radical Islamic terrorism. And I was of such a different frame of mind then, a different way of belief, that I wrote that off completely. And it's like, what is he trying? But it's true. Why would you cut off certain words? Like you said, it seems hyperbolic, but what side of the culture war are you on? It's very, I
Right.
don't know.
Well, we know what side they're on.
Well, I know now. It's disturbing.
Yeah. So a while ago on Unsafe Space, I interviewed Bosch Fawston, who was a cartoonist. He grew up Muslim, and he's very um, anti, I guess, anti-Islam philosophy, not anti-Muslims, but anti-Islam. And he pointed out something really interesting. He said, well, it's not even just that they use one term. It's not that they've chosen it. So instead of like saying, let's say you said it was Islamic terrorism, like, okay, well, that's too charged. We don't want to use that term. So we're going to call it Islamic extremism or extreme Islam terrorism or some,
Radical, yeah.
come up with some radical, right? He come up with some term. He said, it's interesting to note that most of the time they don't just come up with one term. They have a bunch of terms. And they're the only reason that there's they have a bunch of terms, but none of them are just like Islamic terrorists, right? None of them are very clear, like distilled. He said the only reason to do that, the only reason to have a bunch of terms is because you want to obfuscate what you're talking about. Like you could call it, you know, any word you wanted, right? You could call it, I don't know, I'll pick up something off my desk, Muslim flashcardism. It doesn't matter what you call it, or people would figure out with one label, people would figure out what you're talking about, and you would start to be clear. So the only a lot of different terms is because you don't want to be clear. You don't want anyone to be able to point to any kind of clarity about the fact that actually there is a hell of a lot of terrorism coming out of Islam, and it's ideologically tied to a lot of Islamic beliefs.
That is so interesting, Carter. That I never thought of. I mean, you're right. What they don't say radical white supremacy or white nationalism. They're not like afraid of what if we. They're not like we have to separate this out from all white people,
Right.
or we have to separate this out the way they do with all Muslims to make sure we're very specific. That's very
Right.
interesting. Wow, what a good point.
It wasn't
That's very similar to how they don't want you to give a name to what I call SJW ideology. They don't
right.
want you to name it because then you can talk about it and criticize it. I asked. I mean, this happened again over the weekend. Some person on Twitter was upset that I was using the word SJW. I'm like, what term do you prefer? They never answer. They don't have a term for it because they don't want you to talk about it.
Right.
But I don't know. It's so weird.
So anyway, I mean, yeah, sad.
Can I read you part of this Dr. Dorothy Kim's thing? It's long. I'm not going to read the whole thing.
Sure.
But by the way, she's the one that's kind of, I periodically go down very specific SJW rabbit holes. So if anyone's interested, there's been this thing brewing in medieval studies in academia, and Dr. Dorothy Kim is kind of the ringleader of a bunch of academics who've been just continually going after Dr. Rachel Brown. And Rachel Brown is another professor of medieval studies. She's an author, and she's friends with Milo Yiannopoulos. And so they've incorrectly labeled her everything from white supremacist to Nazi. They routinely are trying to get this woman fired. It's just this obsession with her that they have. And they do so by painting Dorothy Kim as a victim. They do all the classic SJW stuff. It's like, I'm a victim, therefore I'm not the bully. No, you're the bully. Anyway, she wrote this whole thing to other medievalists about what they could and could not say. And she's like, I'm just going to skip ahead like 3 paragraphs because it's long. If you're planning to write a thing or going to be interviewed by mainstream news agencies, please do not say things that will be immediately used to stoke this, quote, Western civilization and we are under attack rhetoric. In particular, avoid using the term civilization, and especially the terms Western civilization. Avoid making this about Catholicism or Christianity. It's Notre Dame. Also avoid the French nationalism angle, because that's just going to stoke a lot of white supremacist French nationalism and Catholicism towards really vulnerable groups already under attack out there in Europe. Remember that Joan of Arc is a symbol for the French far right of all things French and national. So work on counter narratives, people. Work on discussing how governments now have the control of keeping up buildings, art, etc. of the past that are major tourist sites. Do not fund these things. Same can be said of the Brazilian Fire in the National Museum. Discuss that, but stay away from the all caps, right, far right buzzwords and rhetoric. No Western civilization, no French nationalism, no Catholic nationalism, etc. In the coming weeks, you will be turned to as experts to discuss the burning of Notre Dame for news outlets. Please be really mindful and careful about how you express your rhetoric and your discussions to not encourage that what you say to be used in order to cause harm to those targeted in far right rhetoric. And then she has like 4 addendums. Oh my gosh. And also avoid using Judeo-Christian seriously. Seriously, talk about living spaces of use, about the complexities of upkeep, about governments not giving money to make sure things can be maintained and safe and secure. Just do not make your discussion or your piece or your interview into a far right catnip. Don't use Judeo-Christian. Can't use that word. I mean, just unbelievable. And don't use Western or the beginning of Western. This falls into the Western civilization trap. I'm looking at you, musicologists. But one of my friends on Facebook said, anybody that says I'm looking at you in an open letter deserves to be horsewhipped. Like, I'm looking at you, musicologists. The arrogance to write this letter to other medievalists and tell them what other professors, other academics, what language they can and cannot use. This infuriated me as well. I was like, how dare you? It's like she thinks herself a disciple, you know, like a.
Well, I will propose that she has provided an excellent resource for people who want to talk about anything, including Notre Dame. Just do the opposite. Everything she says not to do is exactly what you should be doing. So, if you want to know, if you're pick a side of the culture war and then just go completely against her advice, if that's the side you pick.
This is a great example of how they, like, even professors, adults, they are subject to the social media mob and social pressure and making sure they say the correct, ideologically correct things. And you get someone like her, who's Asian American woman. She's what we call or what Gracie West would call a high priest within the SJW ideology, because she checks off so many marginalized boxes. So this is the high priest talking down to all the other people in the faith about what they can and cannot say. It's fascinating. By the way, I asked Dr. Rachel Brown if she would like to be on our podcast. This is the first time telling you this, and she said yes.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Great news for everyone. So, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, well, it is a culture war. And, when the enemy tells you, please don't press here, it hurts. I guess what to do. So,
please don't press here, it hurts.
Yeah. So can we say Western civilization, Christianity? What are all the buzzwords we're not?
You're not allowed to talk about Joan of Arc.
Joan of Arc.
Yeah. And by the way, rational people, think about this for a second. If you're trying to argue that bad people, like white nationalists, alt-right, whatever, have taken over these terms and are using them, why would you just surrender those terms to them so that those things become associated with the white now? Why would you just surrender Christianity to them?
They want them to be associated with the bad, because the alt-right is already looked at as bad. So they just take what they don't like and say those are alt-right terms, so that they're like, oh, now they're all bad. You can't use Western civilization as a word anymore.
Bingo. See, if you really cared about those things, you would not let them be surrendered to bad people. That's why I don't surrender the term liberal. Right. They will not take that word from me. The bad people, the people in the alt-left, will not take that word from me.
Right. Yeah. What a mess. Well, I feel like we should mention that it's Earth Day. I don't want to change the subject.
Change it.
Yeah, it's Earth Day. I don't know what to say about that. I don't really like Earth Day. I don't like what it stands for.
What does it stand for?
I think most people who view them, so most people think environmentalism is about like looking out the window and being like, yeah, I like nature, so we should preserve nature in some way, which everyone agrees with. But I think fundamentally most environmentalism is, and the ideology behind Earth Day is primitivism and its elevation of the environment over man or over humans. Humans are part of the environment. We survive by manipulating the environment and changing it for our benefit. And if you think that's a problem and you view that as destructive, just fundamentally, you're anti-human. And, do I care about things that affect the earth that may affect the human population? Yes, we need to live here. Absolutely. Do I think if you look at most of the environmentalists, you can tell by their political convictions, how serious they are about the environment versus how serious they are about basically Marxism, right? So if you cared about the environment, for example, here, I'll throw this one out. This isn't my argument, but I like it. If you cared about the environment, I assume you would care about overconsumption. We consume a lot, we throw a lot away. Consuming things cause like wastes energy, right? We have a consumption society. They would agree, I think. We overconsume as a society, right? Okay, so that's a big problem. How do we reduce our carbon footprint? How do we consume less, throw less stuff away? All fine. Well, if you really care about that, you would ask yourself, like, well, what enables all this weird overconsumption? Oh, gee, debt. That's why we overconsume. We borrow money from future generations so we can spend it now. And all of that borrowing and spending overconsumes. So you would immediately argue, hey, the government should stop spending more money than it has. We should stop doing, the government should get smaller. Stop borrowing money from the future generations to spend it now. You don't need to build all this stuff. You don't need to spend all this effort and money now. Stop debt spending. Debt spending is by definition consumption now for production that you haven't produced.
Explain this to me like you're explaining it to a dummy. So I can better explain it because I'm not sure. So how would you connect this in the minds of people to, when you're talking about overconsumption, you're not talking about on the individual level, I guess, and the amount of garbage that each.
I'm talking as Western civilization, the bad word that I'm not supposed to use, right? Their enemy is basically like Western civilization, right? Their enemy is like the industrial society because they're basically, you can also just look at all their policies, right? It's all about using force to limit what people can and can't do. Have regulations about this, prevent that, force this, blah, blah, like that's all what it is. It's all like expand government and use guns to point at people and force them not to do stuff. That's their entire, you never have anyone who's like an environmentalist say like, hey, maybe we should roll back some program over here. Like that's never
That's
right?
true. That's now that I think about it, yes.
That gives you some pause as to like, well, what's their real agenda? And I have a friend who calls them watermelons. They're green on the outside, but they're red right through and through. Environment is not their goal. There's not their cause. So the consumption thing, yeah, I'm talking about like Western civilization. So they'll say, just as you can let's look at it at the individual level. We'll make it really simple, right? Credit card debt, right? Something that's encouraged by our monetary policies, encouraged by the government. So originally I was talking about government debt because that's a lot of consumption is enabled, but put that aside, just think about it as an individual, right? Okay. So if you want to spend, let's say you want to consume something, you want to buy a new iPhone, right? But you don't have the money to buy a new iPhone, right? Well, if you don't have the money and you're not going to go into debt, what will you do? Well, you won't buy the iPhone. So you've just not consumed. So we didn't mine heavy metals for that iPhone. We didn't burn fossil fuels in factories. We didn't use oil to power ships to get the parts over here, or the completed iPhone, right? So all that, quote, impact, all that, quote, destruction of the environment, like all those things didn't happen because you didn't buy the iPhone because you didn't have the money to buy the iPhone. Now, if instead I say, oh, borrow the money for the iPhone, dude, it's fine. You could pay it later. In fact, you don't even really have to ever pay. Just keep paying the interest and like eventually future
you'll pay it for it several times over. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So now I get the iPhone. So now we've mined those heavy metals. We've burned those fossil fuels. We've done all those things so that I can have an iPhone now. Right. And it's not that I'm actually over consuming generally, because eventually I will have to pay for it, but I'm certainly bringing all those carbon footprint. Like I'm moving, if you think about when am I going to impact the environment, I'm moving that impact from the future when I might have decided to buy an iPhone once I had to, and I'm pulling it all forward to now. I'm going to impact now.
That's
Right?
interesting. Okay.
So, and I think the government does that on a massive, massive scale, right? They want to spend lots of money because they like to promise money, because promising money gets dumb people to vote for them. So they promise free stuff. Elizabeth Warren says free college. Everyone votes for her. Hopefully not. And and suddenly we're spending more money than we should have in building buildings and doing things, and like all that stuff has an impact. So I don't know. I prefer a view in which humans are viewed as part of the environmental ecosystem, and we don't freak out because we change the landscape of the environment. Like we don't lose our shit over changes to the environment, so long as they're good for humans, right?
Right.
Like that's okay with me, right? And there's a lot of straw men in the environmentalist movement. There's a lot of like, oh my god, species are dying. Like that's how evolution works. Species have been dying forever, since there was a species of anything. There's been dead 99.9% of species are dead. Like, so
It's still
things.
sad. I would still rather they not, like, I'm still, I mean, I am an environmentalist in some ways, I guess, still, because I,
Why
I
is it sad? They die without humans. Things die off. They're
yeah,
evolutionary dead
I mean,
ends.
like like the silverback gorillas, for example, those, there's something about that that's just really,
Cool. I mean, I guess the dinosaurs died too. Like lots of things happen, right? And if it's like a nice to have, it's like, to me, it's like that's like an aesthetic preference. I like these big hairy things look kind of neat.
no, it's not
Fine,
just,
so buy some, breed them, and have your own fucking zoo. But like, we don't have to change the course of like how humans live and survive so that some people are happy about their particular aesthetically pleasing pets that they think shouldn't die. I mean, I just, maybe I'm very cold. I just don't like, I don't care.
you're very
I
cold.
don't care about all, like, I just don't care. I mean, I care a little bit. Like, sure, I don't want to just go killing species for no reason, but we don't, right? Right now, if you're a farmer, you have to worry about like the EPA coming in and yelling that there's some random toad that no one cares about whose natural habitat is mostly only in the area where you need to plant food. Like, it just doesn't even, it's like,
But sometimes it's important, like sometimes those species are necessary for certain, like the thing with the bees, for example.
so that's, I also find that a lot of bullshit, because like, it's this view that the environment, it's this, I feel it's this view that's totally anti-scientific. The
Hmm.
environment and the ecosystem is not something that's always been this way, must always be this way, can only survive this way, and any like anything you do will throw it out of balance and we'll all like fuck up. The world changes constantly. There's constantly species death and changing of environment, and like, it's, for millennia it's very desert like in an area, and then some plant comes in and there's an invasive species or what. Like, things change. That's how nature works. Nature is volatile, chaotic, messy. Things die, things grow, things take over. So to me, and like, humans is just another thing like that. So I don't really care. I think if your standard is not human flourishing, that's when you're doing something wrong. I don't mind if you're like, my standard is human flourishing and it would be nice to have XYZ, or I miss this species and it would be nice to have them in a zoo or to preserve. Like, as soon as you start pointing guns at people and saying you can't do this or that on your own land because it's going to impact some, invertebrate that someone else cares about for some reason that they can't really articulate because they think it's part of some ecosystem, but like, so what? So the ecosystem changes. Who cares?
But Carter,
What's sacred about the
look
current?
at look at this mountain gorilla.
Okay.
Sorry.
I mean, I know I'm gonna get called an asshole and be cold for this,
You
but
will be.
I don't
I don't know.
care.
It's an interesting. Yeah,
I don't care. I care. Here's my problem. My problem. Maybe it's a problem. People say it's a problem. I care about humans. I care about humans. And when you're trying to outlaw coal, for example, or like when you're trying to say you can't have cheap power, you're killing humans, mostly in poor places like Africa, who need energy to fucking survive. Humans are victims of disease and famine and a whole bunch of crap. And the only way we survive on this goddamn planet is by manipulating it and finding ways to produce energy and building medicine and building refrigeration. And as soon as you start limiting all of that, you are killing people.
Okay, let me say something.
That was my rant.
But you made me think about something, and I've always thought about it in one way, and maybe I'll think about it differently. But I have to wrap this up in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, we're long. This is going long. We should wrap it up.
Well, let's pick this up later.
All right.
How about that?
Yeah, it was a rant.
Just remind me, I want to talk about Tanzania.
In the middle of a Covfefe show.
A Covfefe, yeah, but just remind me, I want to talk about Tanzania and colobus monkeys.
Okay.
At some point.
Someone will remind you that you need to talk about monkeys.
Yeah. Look at this. One other quick book to show you on screen since you were talking about getting out of debt. My friend Tamara, who watches and listens to the show, sent me this book, Dave Ramsey, Little Money Makeover. Okay. This book is changing things for me. I just say, if you guys haven't, it seems like it's common sense stuff, but it's stuff I didn't learn. Like I didn't learn it from my parents. I didn't learn it in college. I was too busy taking women's studies classes, like African dance and critical race theory. Yes. But it's all about getting out of debt. And he talks about debt, and he talks about how you should never get into it in the first place. Don't ever get a credit card, and how you can buy things without a credit score. It's like, oh, I wish I'd read this a lot longer. If you guys are young, or even if you're not young people, if you're older people and you haven't read this, I recommend it. So.
Well, go. Your next job is to go get him on the show.
Oh, yeah, that would be nice. Okay, I'll try.
So we should end on a positive note. Not a weird impromptu Earth Day rant. So the positive note is, I want everyone to just breathe a sigh of relief. Jussie Smollett's brother says it's not a hoax and he's a real victim. And we should really consider that. So
I didn't hear that.
No, relax. He wrote an op-ed about it, and we really should consider that Jussie is the victim of an attack.
He's the victim here. He's the real victim here.
He is. So with that, I guess
it's the Dr. Dorothy Kim. She's the real victim here.
Yeah. All right. Well, happy Monday, everyone. Again, we went long. We'll go short at some point.
Yeah.
How much I can rant forever. I'm an old curmudgeon. Maybe it should be curmudgeons and Covfefe all in the same time.
Coffee. Yeah.
All right. Well, have a good day, everyone.
Bye, guys. Bye, Carter.